The morning it happened did not look like a morning where a life unravels. Light slipped through the kitchen blinds in narrow gold ribbons, dust floating in them like it had nowhere better to be. I walked in holding my side the way I always did lately, trying not to show the tight pinch that ran from my ribs down to my hip. Mom already stood at the counter, pressing the start button on the toaster for the second time, even though the bread was already dark. Dad sat at the small wooden table with a stack of mail he pretended to read. My name was on the top envelope, but he kept tapping it with a stiff finger as if it belonged to someone else. I was 22 and scheduled for surgery in 9 days. The kind of surgery doctors say you should not put off because small things become big things fast. Dr. Hale had looked at me with steady gray eyes as he said that. You need this done, Mara, not next year, not someday, soon. I believed him because the pain had been getting sharper every week. Some nights it wrapped itself around my abdomen like a fist. But Mom kept saying I was strong and young and things like this were just a bump in the road. She used that exact phrase in a cheerful voice that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. That morning, her cheerfulness felt forced the way cheap perfume feels heavy in the air. She turned as I entered, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping. Sit down for a minute, honey. We need to talk. Dad avoided my eyes. He stared down at his coffee like he expected it to rise up and offer him a way out. My stomach tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with the pain. I sat down slowly. The chair creaked. The toast popped up again, darker this time. Mom didn't even flinch. She folded her hands in front of her like she was about to lead a prayer. Your sister needs us. It was the first sentence, a familiar one. Whenever something involved Sienna, the world tilted her way. Mom kept going. She has an opportunity of a lifetime. Liam arranged a travel partnership for her content. A luxury Mediterranean tour. First class everything. It will open doors for her career, and you know how important that is. Dad cleared his throat the way he always did right before delivering bad news. He slid the envelope with my name away from himself and toward me. Mara, the surgery is expensive. Even with insurance, we had to make a choice. A choice. The room began to ring. I felt the floor under my feet, but not in the usual way. My breath stayed in the top of my chest. Mom tried to soften it. We had to reassign the insurance authorization. They needed coverage for the trip. You understand. It's non-refundable, and her content contract starts in 2 days. If she misses it, she may never get another opportunity like this. I stared at them both. Words sat heavy and unmoving in my throat. They had canceled my surgery. They had taken the one thing that could stop the pain from swallowing my life whole. They had chosen her European beaches and sunset photo shoots over my health. Dad spoke again, his voice small. We know you will figure something out. You always do. You're resilient. The word resilient hit me harder than anything else. It sounded like a consolation prize for someone who never got the real prize to begin with. The pain in my side pulsed once, sharp and hot. I pressed my palm to my abdomen under the table. I managed to hear myself ask what happened to the date, the pre-op appointment, the insurance approval, my place on the surgery schedule. Mom looked away. It was all canceled. They said we could call back later when things are settled. Settled? Like my health was a bill that could wait until payday. I felt something inside me shift and fall out of place. Not with a crash, more like a quiet slide into a dark part of myself where disappointment had turned into something colder. I pushed the envelope back toward Dad. Keep it? I stood up even though the movement made me dizzy. My hands shook, but I kept them at my sides. The toaster clicked as if trying to punctuate the moment. Mom reached for me but stopped halfway. Her hand suspended in the air. Mara, sweetie, family supports each other. This is what we do. I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't use it. I walked to the hallway, moving slowly so I wouldn't take a breath too deep. My room smelled like laundry detergent and eucalyptus lotion. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands pressed to my thighs and listened to the faint murmur of their voices in the kitchen. They sounded relieved, which was somehow the worst part. On the dresser sat my black canvas duffel bag. I had packed it 2 nights before. Not because I expected anything like this, but because the pain had been getting worse and I wanted to be ready to stay overnight at the clinic if it came to that. I pulled the duffel closer and started adding more clothes. Not folded, just placed. My fingers moved on their own. A pressure spread through my chest, the kind that makes a person feel both heavy and hollow. I realized in that moment that I was not angry, not shocked, not devastated. It was something colder, a kind of acceptance that told me this was the moment I stopped waiting for my parents to choose me. When I zipped the bag, the sound was too loud in the quiet room. I sat still for a minute, just breathing, just existing in the freshly exposed truth of what my family had become. Footsteps approached. Dad's voice came from the doorway. "We didn't want you to take it this way." I looked at him. His face seemed smaller than I remembered. I wanted to say something forgiving or brave or even sarcastic. Nothing came. I lifted the bag onto my shoulder. The weight of it steadied me. His mouth opened like he was about to promise something he couldn't deliver. I walked past him. Mom's voice followed me to the door. "We love you, honey. Sienna's opportunity helps all of us. You'll see." I stepped outside. The air in Portland had the crisp smell of early fall. Leaves scratched the pavement in small spirals. I breathed for the first time since the kitchen and felt the pain pulse again, but I kept walking. My little blue sedan sat under the maple tree, where it always did. I unlocked it and placed the duffel in the back seat. Sitting behind the wheel, I allowed myself one long exhale, a quiet moment that felt like the thin line between the life I had lived and whatever came next. The engine turned over with a soft hum, familiar and steady. I rested my hand on the steering wheel, letting the calm fill the spaces where shock had begun to fade. The house stood behind me, silent and still. I backed out of the driveway and watched it grow smaller in the rearview mirror until the curve of the street carried it out of sight. The morning it happened did not look like a morning where a life unravels. Light slipped through the kitchen blinds in narrow gold ribbons, dust floating in them like it had nowhere better to be. I walked in holding my side the way I always did lately, trying not to show the tight pinch that ran from my ribs down to my hip. Mom already stood at the counter pressing the start button on the toaster for the second time, even though the bread was already dark. Dad sat at the small wooden table with a stack of mail he pretended to read. My name was on the top envelope, but he kept tapping it with a stiff finger as if it belonged to someone else. I was 22 and scheduled for surgery in 9 days. The kind of surgery doctors say you should not put off because small things become big things fast. Dr. Hale had looked at me with steady gray eyes as he said that. "You need this done, Mara. Not next year, not someday, soon." I believed him because the pain had been getting sharper every week. Some nights it wrapped itself around my abdomen like a fist. But Mom kept saying I was strong and young and things like this were just a bump in the road. She used that exact phrase in a cheerful voice that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. That morning, her cheerfulness felt forced, the way cheap perfume feels heavy in the air. She turned as I entered, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping. "Sit down for a minute, honey. We need to talk." Traffic eased into a quiet rhythm as I pulled onto the main road, each block putting more distance between me and the house I had lived in for most of my life. I kept my eyes on the painted lines ahead of me, letting their steady pattern calm the shaking that had not fully stopped in my hands. I did not have a plan yet. I only knew that I could not stay in a place where my health was something they believed could be postponed like an oil change. The pain in my side pulsed again, a slow twisting reminder of why I had needed that surgery in the first place. I breathed through it and kept driving. By the time I reached the clinic where I worked part-time, the sky had turned a soft silver. It was too early for my shift, but being here felt better than being anywhere else. The parking lot was mostly empty except for the familiar blue sedan that belonged to Nurse Emery. She was always the first one in. I walked inside, the automatic doors opening with a sigh that made me feel strangely anchored. The reception lights were dimmed, casting the waiting room in a lavender glow. I headed straight to the staff lounge, hoping to sit for a minute before anyone noticed the tight way I was holding my body. I did not make it to the door before I heard Emery behind me. Her voice had that warm steadiness that never changed no matter how chaotic things got. "You are here early again, kiddo." I turned to her and tried to smile. It felt brittle. "Could not sleep," I said softly. The truth sat under those words, but I did not want to speak it yet. Emery stepped closer, her eyes scanning me with that quiet nurse instinct she had. She noticed the way I pressed a hand to my abdomen and her expression shifted. "How bad is the pain today?" "It is all right. Just tight." I started to walk into the lounge, but she placed a hand on my arm. It was a gentle touch, not demanding, just enough to say she was not buying the word all right. "Sit," she said. "Let me make some tea." I lowered myself onto the couch while she filled the kettle. The small room hummed softly. I watched her move, the familiar motions of someone who had spent her life helping people. When she sat across from me, she handed me a mug and looked at me over the rim of her own. "You look like you have been carrying something heavy. What happened?" I stared at the steam rising from my cup until the words surfaced. My parents canceled the surgery, the insurance approval, everything. They used it for Sienna. She has a big trip coming up. Emery lowered her tea. For a few long moments, she did not say anything. And somehow that was worse than shock. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but had an edge I had never heard before. "They canceled a medical procedure you need for a vacation." "It is not just a vacation," I said quietly. "It is some influencer partnership. She says it could change her career. Mom called it an opportunity of a lifetime." Emery blinked slowly like she was trying to process a sentence that made no sense. "And they think you are what? Immortal? Replaceable?" She leaned forward. "Mara, this condition does not wait for anyone. You know that." My eyes stung. I nodded. I know. I did not want to cry here, but the pressure in my chest made breathing feel like pushing through wet sand. "Did you tell Dr. Hale yet?" I shook my head. "No, I left and just drove here. I did not know where else to go." She handed me a tissue without a word. When I had myself together again, she spoke in a thoughtful tone. "There is a patient assistance program Dr. Hale mentioned before. It is strict, but not impossible. It might get you back on the schedule if we move fast." I looked up. Hope flickered like something fragile and thin. "Do you think they would approve me?" Emery gave a small nod. "You have medical need. They will see that. We just need paperwork. And we need to explain why your insurance authorization vanished overnight." My stomach tightened. They transferred it for the trip, or paused it. I do not know the official word they used. Something about reallocating coverage for travel liability. Emery swore under her breath, something sharp and quiet. "That is dangerous," she said fiercely, "and borderline fraudulent. If something happens to you without coverage, they could be held responsible." The idea of my parents facing consequences did not comfort me. It only made everything feel heavier. She looked at me again. "You cannot go home like this. Stay with a friend for a few days. Or stay at my place if you need. My guest room is small but clean." Her kindness hit me hard, and I nodded slowly. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not. Let me help." Before I could answer, the door opened and two techs walked in, laughing about something. Emery touched my shoulder once more and stood. I wiped my eyes quickly and rose to help start the morning prep. The familiar routine steadied my hands. For a while, I could almost forget that the ground beneath my life had cracked open. Around mid-morning, Dr. Hale arrived. He walked into the lounge reviewing a chart and nodded to me in that reserved way he had. When he saw my face, he lowered the folder. "Mara, you all right?" Emery cleared her throat behind him, the signal we used when something sensitive needed his attention. He frowned slightly and motioned me into his office. I followed him inside and closed the door. The room always smelled faintly of antiseptic and mint. He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what happened." I repeated the story. This time the words came out steadier but carried more weight. His eyebrows drew together as he listened. "Canceling medical authorization for a cosmetic trip is highly irregular," he said carefully, "and unwise. Your condition has progressed. I do not like that you are still walking around without a surgical date." I pressed my palm against my thigh to keep it from shaking. "I know. I just did not have a choice." He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "If we file for the assistance program today, you might get approval in 2 to 3 weeks. It is not ideal, but it is far better than waiting indefinitely." The pain in my side throbbed again, and I flinched without meaning to. His eyes caught it. "How often is that happening?" "Every day," I admitted. "Sometimes at night, too." His jaw tightened. "That decides it, then. I want scans today. If there is any accelerated risk, we push for immediate provisional approval." The thought of being placed back into the system gave me a cautious breath of hope. For the first time since leaving home, something felt possible again. I left his office with a stack of papers and instructions. They felt heavy in my hands, but not in a crushing way. More like the weight of something that needed to be carried forward. By late afternoon, I stepped outside into the cool Portland air. The papers tucked against my chest. Clouds drifted low and the breeze smelled faintly of rain. I walked to my car slowly, taking careful breaths that kept the pain manageable. For a moment, I sat inside with the engine off, watching people pass on the sidewalk. strangers moving with purpose, without the heaviness that had settled into my bones. I felt the distance between who I had been that morning and who I was now. It was not confidence exactly, more like the beginning of my own momentum, small but real. The phone buzzed in my bag. I did not need to look to know it was home. I let it vibrate until it stopped. The silence afterward felt like a clean space opening in front of me. I turned the key and pulled out of the lot, letting the road stretch ahead as the sky darkened into early evening. The evening settled into that soft blue hush Portland always gets before the streetlights come on. I drove without thinking about where I was going, letting the turns happen on their own. By the time I paid attention again, I was pulling into the gravel lot of my apartment building, a modest 2-story place tucked between a row of maple trees and a laundromat that smelled like detergent and old coins. I gathered the paperwork from the passenger seat and stepped out slowly, steadying myself when the pain tightened across my abdomen. It passed after a few breaths, not gone but tolerable, like a warning whispered under my ribs. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag onto the small table by the door and set the papers next to it. The space felt too quiet. No hum of conversation, no clatter of my mother moving through the kitchen, no footsteps from my father pacing at the top of the stairs, just the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the faint traffic sounds drifting through the window. I should have felt relieved, but what I felt instead was a strange mixture of grief and relief woven together so tightly I could not separate them. I sat on the couch and pressed a hand to my side again. The pain pulsed like a reminder that time was moving, even if I felt stuck. I tried to picture the patient assistance forms in my bag as a kind of rope thrown across a widening gap. If I held on, maybe I would find something steady. My phone lit up. Another call from home. I let it ring. A text followed, then another. I flipped the phone face down on the coffee table and leaned back, letting the silence settle again. Around 7, my stomach reminded me I had not eaten since morning. I walked to the kitchenette and started boiling water for pasta. The simple rhythm of it helped. Fill the pot, turn the dial, listen for the soft whoosh of the burner. I kept one hand braced on the counter until the ache faded again. Halfway through dinner, there was a knock on the door, light and familiar. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to find Emery standing in the hallway holding a small plastic container. "Thought you might not feel like cooking," she said. "It is chicken and rice, nothing fancy." She glanced at my plate and laughed softly. "But it looks like you beat me to it. I can leave this for tomorrow." I stepped aside and let her in. "Thanks, really. I did not expect anyone tonight." She placed the container in the fridge and then leaned against the counter. "How are you holding up?" The honest answer hovered right under my tongue, but I softened it. "Better since talking to Hale. He thinks we have a shot with the assistance program." Her face brightened. "Told you. He does not take medical risks lightly. If he says we push ahead, then we push ahead. But you need to be careful these next days. No overworking, no pretending this pain is optional." I nodded, feeling oddly grateful to be reminded of something so obvious. I poured her a glass of water and we moved to the couch. She sat with the ease of someone who had been here before, though this was only her second time visiting. She asked about my parents, not with prying curiosity, but in the steady way nurses ask about things that matter. I told her only what I needed to tell, that they did not understand, that they believed this opportunity for Sienna was more urgent than my health, that they trusted I would somehow find another way because I always had. Emery let out a breath through her nose. Families can blind themselves to what is right in front of them. Sometimes love is not the problem. The lack of perspective is. The words settled quietly in the room. I thought of my mother at the toaster, of my father tapping the envelope with my name. I did not know if what they felt was love or something like it, twisted by years of expectations and habits. I only knew it had left me standing outside my own life. A little after 8, she stood and pulled her coat over her scrubs. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "And I mean anything. Do not be stubborn about this." I promised I would call. When she left, the apartment felt different than before she arrived. Less hollow, less heavy. I washed the dishes slowly, letting the warm water loosen the tension in my shoulders. Then I sat back down on the couch and pulled the paperwork toward me. I filled out the first few forms, writing carefully even when my hand cramped. The questions were straightforward: medical history, current symptoms, financial hardship, insurance complications. I hesitated on that last part. Unsure how much detail would help or hurt, I finally wrote that the authorization had been revoked by the policyholders for non-medical use. The truth was not pretty, but it was simple. The pain returned just before 10. A sudden sharp twist that made me fold forward. I rested both hands on the coffee table and breathed through it until it dulled. I should have been afraid, but what I felt instead was determination. Fear had lost its place earlier that day when my parents chose something else over me. I stood and walked to the bathroom, washed my face, and studied myself in the mirror. My reflection looked tired but steady. Not strong exactly, not confident, but present, alive. I turned off the light and returned to the living room. Curling up under the blanket I kept on the couch. The phone buzzed again on the table. I ignored it. Then it buzzed once more. After the third time I picked it up, not to answer but to silence the notifications. The screen showed 5 missed calls and 7 new messages, all from the same group thread. I set the phone face down again and let the quiet return. Around midnight, the apartment settled into a deeper stillness. Cars grew sparse on the road outside. A faint drizzle tapped against the window. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the next few weeks. The scans, the application review, the possibility of surgery. I imagined waking up afterward, the pain finally silent, my body no longer a ticking clock. Sleep came slowly, but when it arrived, it came clean and unburdened. I did not dream of home, or of the kitchen, or of my mother's voice trying to wrap my life in soft excuses. I dreamed of something quieter, an open road, a far horizon, something that felt like movement. When I woke the next morning, the sky was still gray and heavy, with the last of the rain. I stretched carefully, testing the pain, relieved when it stayed muted. I got ready for work and gathered the paperwork that needed to go back to the clinic. As I stepped outside, the damp air brushed against my face, and for the first time in days, I felt a small but unmistakable sense of forward motion. Morning traffic moved lazily through the wet streets as I made my way toward the clinic. The papers tucked inside my bag, feeling heavier than anything I carried. My breath puffed faintly in the cool air, the lingering drizzle leaving a shine across the sidewalks. I felt steadier than the day before, not strong exactly, but anchored by the simple fact that I had somewhere to be and something to do that pointed forward instead of back. Inside the clinic, the lights were brighter than usual. The front desk team was already busy settling in, printers warming up, the faint scent of disinfectant drifting through the lobby. I walked in with the feeling that the day would demand more from me than I expected, though I could not say why. Emery was by the vitals station, sorting charts with her usual brisk efficiency. When she saw me, she lifted her chin in a small greeting. Her eyes flicked briefly to the folder under my arm, and she nodded once as if to say we were doing this together. We started with the scans. The imaging tech guided me through each position. Hold still, breathe in, breathe out. The machine hummed around my body like a distant storm. Pain pulsed faintly but not sharply. When the session ended, I sat up slowly, aware of a thin film of sweat along my spine. The tech told me he would send everything straight to Dr. Hale. Back in the hallway, I spotted Noah near the elevator. He was filling out an intake form, camera bag slung over one shoulder. His presence here surprised me. I mostly saw him at the campus lounge or passing through the photography department where he sometimes guest tutored. He noticed me and gave a small smile. He said he was here shooting updated marketing images for the clinic. His voice was calm and easy, familiar in a way I had not realized I needed. He glanced at my paperwork and asked if everything was all right. I told him it was complicated. He nodded as if he understood without needing the details, then mentioned that he was looking for help on a small project outside the clinic. Something creative, something he thought I could do. He said we could talk later if I wanted. Before I could answer, a wave of discomfort tightened around my abdomen, forcing me to draw a slow breath. He noticed and stepped back, giving me space without making a scene. He told me we could talk when I felt up to it. I thanked him, grateful for the gentle way he handled the moment. I walked toward the clinic break room and found Emery pouring coffee. She eyed the scans order in my hand and motioned for me to sit. I told her what happened in imaging, the small pain, the feeling of being watched by decisions I no longer controlled. She listened the way she always did, patient and steady. Before she could respond, my phone vibrated hard in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but it kept buzzing until it felt impossible to pretend it was not happening. When I finally looked, I saw Sienna's name lighting the screen. Emery saw my face and stepped aside so I could answer if I chose. I rejected the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I was not ready for whatever apology or plea or explanation she had prepared. The break room seemed quieter after that, like even the refrigerators were holding their breath. Later that morning, Dr. Hale called me into his office. He had the scan images pulled up on his monitor, the screen glowing with muted shades of gray and white. He explained that the condition had progressed slightly since my last exam, not dangerously yet, but enough that waiting carried more risk. He said he would fast-track the assistance request and personally call the review board. Hearing that steadied something in me, though the knot in my chest did not ease entirely. As I left his office, another cramp hit me, sharper this time, forcing me to grip the back of a nearby chair. Emery rushed over and guided me into an exam room. She asked how long it had been since the pain started worsening. I told her the truth, that it had been building for months and that I had ignored it longer than I should have. She shook her head, not in judgment but in frustration for what had been done to me. While she checked my vitals, she asked if I had anywhere safe to stay for the next few days. I said I would be all right at my apartment. She reminded me again that her offer still stood if anything changed. I thanked her and meant it. My shift ended early. The pain had drained more energy from me than I expected. I stepped outside into the thin afternoon light, the air cool and restless. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father, then my mother, then the group thread. I let each call fade out. The messages kept coming. When I got home, I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and plugged it in without reading a single notification. I heated up the chicken and rice Emery had brought the night before and ate slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my chest and settle the lingering nausea. After dinner, I sat at the small dining table and looked at my laptop. The screensaver glowed a deep Pacific blue, a photo I had taken months ago near the Oregon coast. I clicked it awake and opened a blank document. I did not know exactly why, but I began sketching out ideas for Noah's project. Color palettes, lighting concepts, a rough storyboard. My hand moved almost before my mind caught up. It felt like stepping briefly outside the tight ring of medical worry that had been circling me for weeks. Halfway through the sketches, the pain tightened again. I set down the pen and leaned back, waiting for the ache to soften. When it did, my eyes drifted to the paperwork stacked beside me, the assistance application, the financial forms, the consent documents, all waiting for the next step, all depending on someone else's approval. A sudden exhaustion washed over me. Not physical exactly, but emotional, like every part of me had been stretched thin since that morning in the kitchen with my parents. I closed the laptop and pushed the papers into a neat pile. The room felt still and quiet when I turned off the overhead light. I made myself a cup of peppermint tea and stood by the window listening to the traffic hum low and steady. People moved on with their lives while mine felt paused between two worlds, one closing behind me and one not yet opened. I carried the tea to the couch and sat down carefully. My hand drifted to my side again, not out of fear this time, but awareness that this condition was still with me, still waiting for its moment. The phone lit up once more across the room. This time I walked over and looked at the screen. A new message from Sienna. The preview showed only a few words, but they were enough to make my pulse quicken. Something is wrong. I pressed the phone against my palm until the screen dimmed again. Then I placed it face down on the table and walked slowly to the couch, the words echoing even after the apartment fell still. My first instinct was to ignore the message, to let it sit there like all the others, but the words kept circling in my mind long after the screen went dark. Something is wrong. It was the kind of phrase that could mean anything and still land like a stone in the center of my chest. I sat on the couch with my tea cooling beside me and tried to decide if I owed her even a single response. The ache along my ribs pulsed again, sharp enough to make me breathe shallowly. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the quiet press against me until my heartbeat steadied. The phone buzzed once more. Another message preview lit the room for a brief second, then vanished. I stood up and walked to the table, not to answer but to silence the notifications before they split my thoughts open. Just as my fingers reached for the phone, it rang. I froze. Then I saw the caller ID. It was not Sienna. It was Mom. I watched the screen until it stopped vibrating. A voice message appeared. I hesitated before pressing play. Her voice filled the room, tight and trembling. Mara, please call us. Something happened on the trip. Sienna is in trouble, and we cannot reach anyone. We need your help. I let the message end, then replayed the last sentence in my mind. We need your help. Of course now they did. I pressed the phone against my chest and walked slowly back to the couch, each step feeling heavier than the one before. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long amber streaks across the wet pavement. I sat down and stared at the dark window until my reflection came into view. I barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked older, tired, but also steadier, like someone who had learned to stand without leaning on anyone else. The thought of calling them back made my stomach tighten. The pain in my side sharpened again, cutting through my hesitation. I closed my eyes until it dulled and opened them to find the phone still glowing faintly. After a long breath, I tapped the message thread and typed a single response. Is she safe? The reply came less than 10 seconds later. No. Then another message. Something happened in Amalfi and the hospital is asking for insurance information and we cannot give them anything. They need authorization for her care. Please, Mara, answer us. Of course. Insurance. I felt my throat tighten as the realization washed over me. They had reassigned my coverage for her trip, the same coverage that was supposed to protect my life. Now that decision had circled back to them in a way they had not imagined. I typed another question. What happened? Mom replied that Sienna had collapsed outside a hotel and had been taken to a local clinic. They were running tests, but needed proof of coverage to admit her to a larger hospital. Liam had vanished the moment things became complicated. Her voice messages were frantic, tangled with panic and guilt and something close to fear. I set the phone down, feeling my hands tremble. A memory surfaced from when we were younger. Sienna sitting on the top bunk and braiding my hair while telling me stories she made up. Back then she seemed larger than life, confident in ways I never was. I wondered briefly if that girl still existed beneath the influencer gloss. The pain along my abdomen tightened again. I pressed a hand against it and breathed slowly until it settled. My body was reminding me of the truth. I was not well. I was not in a position to fix whatever disaster they had walked into. I needed help too, more than any of them ever seemed to understand. The phone buzzed again, another message, then another. I let them pile up while I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The apartment felt too quiet, as if waiting for me to decide something it had no stake in. I carried the glass back to the couch and sat down with my back against the cushions, staring at the ceiling until the room settled again around me. After a while, I picked up the phone and read the latest message. Please respond. We do not know what to do. They will not treat her without coverage, and they are saying something about unauthorized policy changes. Unauthorized. The word cut through the air like a blade. It meant the insurance company had flagged the transfer. It meant there were consequences coming that my parents had not considered. I closed my eyes and spoke softly into the quiet room. I cannot fix this for you. The words hung there for a moment, even though I had not said them out loud to anyone who could hear. They were true all the same. I typed another message. I cannot give authorization. My coverage was revoked without my consent. Mom's response came instantly. Mara, please, she is your sister. I stared at the sentence until it blurred slightly. Then I typed the truth. I am not attached to the policy anymore. You removed me. There is nothing I can offer them. This time there was no immediate reply. Minutes passed. The heater clicked on in the corner of the room. The refrigerator hummed. I sat there waiting for the next inevitable wave of messages. When the phone finally lit again, it was a different name, Dad. His message was short and sharp. You have to help us. They need someone with the policy information. They are threatening to refuse care. I felt anger rise through me, not hot but cold and steady. They had stripped me of the coverage I needed for surgery. They had dismissed my pain like a minor inconvenience. Now they wanted me to solve a problem they had created. I typed slowly, choosing each word with care. I cannot give them what I do not have. You reassigned everything. That was your decision. A long silence followed. Then a single message. If something happens to her, it will be on you. The words hit me in the chest like a blunt force. I turned off the phone and set it on the arm of the couch, my breath tightening as the room shifted around me. For a moment, I felt dizzy, the edges of my vision softening. I leaned forward and held my side until the pain eased. I sat there a long time, letting the weight of the day settle in layers. I thought of the scans waiting for review, the forms still lying on the table, the way my parents had chosen convenience over my health without a second thought. I thought of Sienna in a clinic half a world away, scared and alone, the version of her who used to braid my hair vanishing beneath the woman she had become. The sky outside had grown darker. The streetlights flickered softly in the rain. I stood up slowly, steadying myself with one hand against the couch. My body ached, not just from the condition but from carrying the emotional load that did not belong to me. I walked to the bedroom and pulled the blanket from the end of the bed, wrapping it around my shoulders as I returned to the window. The light outside blurred through the glass, fractured by droplets clinging to the pane. My phone stayed silent on the table, white screen dimmed to a small glow, waiting. I watched it from across the room, knowing the quiet was only temporary, knowing the next wave of messages would come soon enough. I stayed by the window until the glow faded completely, and the apartment settled into stillness again. The dark eventually thinned into a soft morning gray, the kind that makes everything look quieter than it really is. I had fallen asleep on the couch without meaning to, the blanket twisted around my legs, my neck stiff from the angle. For a moment I lay still, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip of last night's rain sliding off the gutter outside. Then the ache in my side reminded me where I was and why sleep had come only in broken pieces. I sat up slowly, easing the blanket off my shoulders. My phone still rested on the table, dark and silent now. I did not know if the silence meant my parents had finally stopped reaching out or if the battery had died while I slept. I did not check. I let it sit there while I moved to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking small sips until the tight feeling in my stomach softened. The pain along my ribs lingered, not sharp but insistent. I pressed my palm against it for a moment and breathed until the discomfort dulled. I knew I would have to tell Emery about it later. She would probably scold me gently for not calling her when the pain flared during the night. I could already hear her voice in my head, and it brought a small, tired smile to my face. I showered, dressed for work, and gathered the paperwork for the assistance program into a neat folder. The motions grounded me, simple steps in a day that already felt heavy, before it had truly begun. As I stepped outside, the cool air brushed against my skin, carrying the faint smell of wet pavement and pine. A thin mist clung to the tops of the buildings. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked to my car. The clinic parking lot was already half full when I arrived. Inside, the bustle of morning preparation wrapped around me like a familiar hum. Phones ringing, printers warming, the steady shuffle of nurses gathering supplies. For a moment the routine steadied my breathing. Then I saw Dr. Hale leaving his office and waving me over. He closed the door behind me once I stepped inside. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that told me he had kept a close watch on my scans overnight. He motioned for me to sit and took a moment before speaking. The images show a little more progression than last month. Nothing alarming yet, but enough that we cannot delay the surgery much longer. I filed the assistance application last night. They have your case flagged as urgent. I nodded, absorbing each word slowly. Thank you, really. I know this is extra work. His expression softened. You are not extra work. You are a patient who needs care. That is the beginning and end of it. I felt something tighten in my throat. Gratitude, shame, relief, a mixture of things I did not quite know how to hold. He asked if the pain had increased. I admitted that it had. He made a note in my chart and said he wanted additional labs done today to strengthen the urgency of the request. When I stepped out into the hallway, Emery was waiting. She looked at me for half a second and must have read whatever was written on my face. Pain spiked again last night, didn't it? You look pale. I gave a small shrug. It passed. She sighed, the kind of sigh that came from caring more than she ever said out loud. I will add to the lab schedule. Do not try to argue. I managed a faint smile. I was too tired to argue even if I wanted to. For the next hour, I moved through the familiar motions of work. Though everything felt slightly muted around the edges, like I was moving underwater. I drew blood samples, updated patient charts, stocked exam rooms. The rhythm steadied me, but did not distract me from the heaviness sitting in the center of my chest. Around mid-morning, I saw Noah again. He was near the front desk adjusting his camera settings, the strap resting casually against his shoulder. He lifted a hand when he saw me, his expression warm and unhurried. I walked over, grateful for a brief shift in my thoughts. He asked how I was doing, and I told him honestly that it had been a long couple of days. He nodded like he understood more than I said. He mentioned his project again, a creative concept for a small wellness brand he had been consulting. He said he could use someone with my eye for detail, someone who understood natural lighting and texture and mood. He asked if I would consider joining him for a planning session later in the week. The offer caught me off guard. It felt like a piece of a world I had almost forgotten existed. A world where my choices were not entirely dictated by pain or paperwork or fear. I told him I would think about it. He smiled, a quiet, steady smile, and said he hoped I would say yes. Before I could respond further, an urgent call came through the clinic speakers, pulling staff toward an exam room down the hall. I excused myself and followed Emery, adrenaline rising beneath my exhaustion. The emergency turned out to be manageable, a patient with severe dehydration and panic symptoms. But it took time and focus to stabilize him. When everything settled again, I stepped into the hallway and braced myself against the wall for a moment. The pain in my abdomen pulsed, deeper this time, and I had to steady my breathing. Emery passed by and caught the tension in my posture. "Sit," she said firmly, "now." I opened my mouth to protest, but the look she gave me ended the discussion. I sat on the small bench near the supply closet and leaned forward, waiting for the tightness to ease. She knelt down beside me, one hand steady on my shoulder. "This is not something you can push through forever," she said quietly. "You need that surgery soon. Your body is telling you that." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She guided me through slow breaths until the pain lessened. Then she helped me stand, though I felt a little ashamed that I needed the help at all. By early afternoon, I was drained. I clocked out early with the encouragement of both Emery and Dr. Hale, who insisted that rest was not optional. I gathered my things and stepped outside. The sky had cleared, but the air carried a crisp bite that made me shiver. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. A message preview flashed on the screen. This one was from a number I did not recognize. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut told me to read it. I unlocked the phone. The message was short: "Hospital in Salerno, requesting authorization. You are listed as emergency contact. Please respond." My heart jolted. Emergency contact. Somehow, after everything, my name was still tied to her in a system she had never cared to understand. I felt the ground tilt a little beneath me. Another message arrived instantly. "Additional tests needed. Patient unstable." I stood there in the parking lot, cold air filling my lungs, my hand tightening around the phone until my knuckles ached. The quiet ache in my side pulsed again, but this time it was not the only thing demanding my attention. I lowered myself into the car seat slowly and closed my eyes, letting the wave of conflicting emotions pass through me one at a time. Fear, anger, sadness, and something else that felt dangerously close to guilt, even though I knew I had no reason to feel it. When I opened my eyes, the phone buzzed again, a new message lighting the screen. I stared at it without opening it, the weight of the moment settling around me like a thick fog. The engine sat silent, waiting for me to decide what came next. The phone buzzed again and I stared at the glowing screen without touching it. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. The new message preview showed only a fragment from the hospital in Salerno, requesting immediate response. I set the phone on my lap and leaned my head back against the seat, letting the cold air drifting through the cracked window steady me. My hands tingled with that strange mix of fear and anger that had been building for days. I finally turned the key in the ignition, not because I knew where I was going, but because sitting still made everything feel heavier. The engine hummed quietly. I rested my wrists on the steering wheel and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the reality settle in layers. They had put my name on her records. They had used me once again without asking. Even now, even across an ocean, they reached for me when the consequences of their choices closed in on them. A sharp pulse of pain gripped my side. I breathed through it, slow breaths that barely moved my chest. When it eased, I put the car in gear and let it roll forward. I did not go far. I stopped at the edge of the lot and waited until I felt steady enough to drive. Instead of heading home, I drove toward Forest Park, the long, winding road lined with evergreens thick from the rain. The trees towered on both sides, their dark branches arching overhead. It felt like the one place where I could think without the clinic lights or my apartment walls closing in. I parked near the trail entrance and sat in the silence. The phone buzzed again, then again. I finally turned it over in my hand. Scrolling through the notifications, messages from my mother, scattered with panic, messages from my father, sharp and clipped, a new message from a staff member at the hospital, saying their system still showed me as the emergency contact. I exhaled slowly. My parents had told the travel insurance company that I approved the transfer. They must have filled out forms pretending the arrangement was mutual. My name had probably been signed electronically through a portal I never saw. They had crossed a line that felt deeper than every other mistake they had made. I stepped out of the car and let the cold air wash over me. The sky was a pale gray that seemed to hold its breath. Leaves clung to the wet ground. I walked a short distance down the trail, my boots sinking slightly into the mud. Each step tugged at something inside me, the pain making its way upward. I paused and braced myself against a moss-covered bench until the ache dulled. A voice drifted from behind. Soft, familiar. "Hey, you all right?" I turned to see Noah walking toward me, camera bag over his shoulder, hair damp from the mist. I had forgotten this was one of his regular hiking spots. He stopped a few feet away, giving me room while still making it clear he was there. I told him I needed a place to breathe. He nodded gently and sat on the edge of the bench, not too close. I sat beside him, my hand pressed against my side. He waited a moment before asking if the scans had been bad. I shook my head. Not bad. Just worse than I wanted them to be. He looked at me carefully. "Want to talk about what else is going on?" I hesitated. Talking made things real, but something in his steady presence opened the words before I could stop them. I told him about the messages, about the hospital in Italy, about the insurance transfer I had never agreed to. I kept my voice even, but I felt my throat tighten near the end. He was quiet for a long time, long enough for me to look down at my hands and feel the sting of how exposed I suddenly was. Then he said something simple. "That is a lot for one person to carry." I swallowed hard. I do not know what they expect me to do. He glanced at me. "What do you want to do?" The question startled me. Want? No one had asked me that. Not once. In this entire mess, I opened my mouth but no words came out. I did not know the answer yet. Another wave of pain curled through my side, sharper this time. I sucked in a breath and closed my eyes. Noah leaned forward slightly, not touching me, just ready in case I faltered. "You need rest," he said softly, "and support, not more pressure." I managed a small nod. The pain eased slowly and I breathed out, letting the tension uncoil. Noah stood and offered his hand, not in a way that demanded anything, just a gesture to help me stand. I took it and rose slowly, grateful for the steadiness. We walked back toward the parking lot in silence. When we reached my car, he leaned against the door and looked at me with that calm, grounded patience he always seemed to carry. "If you want someone to sit with you while you figure things out, I can do that. I can also give you space if you need that instead." The kindness in his voice nearly unraveled me. I shook my head gently. "I need to think on my own for a bit." He nodded. Then he said that he would check in later, just to make sure I had made it home safely. There was no pressure in the offer, only care. He walked toward his car, and I watched him go before climbing into mine. Inside the car, the silence felt different now, less suffocating, more like a pause I had chosen. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the hospital coordinator. They wrote that without proper authorization, they would have to transfer Sienna to a facility with limited care, one that offered only basic stabilization. They asked if I could provide proof of any coverage. I typed a response slowly. "I am not on her travel policy. I cannot authorize anything." Another message arrived almost immediately. "Do you wish to be removed as emergency contact?" I stared at the question. It felt both simple and monumental. Removing myself meant severing a thread that had been tied to me since childhood. Keeping myself on the record meant leaving the door open for more crises to spill through. Before I answered, a memory rose uninvited. Sienna and I sitting on our bedroom floor when we were young, trading secrets and whispers. She had been the one who insisted I list her as my emergency contact. when I got my first part-time job, saying she would be there if anything ever happened. Years had passed between that promise and whatever she had become now. I looked at the phone again. The cursor blinked patiently. After a few seconds, I typed a single word. Yes. Then I hit send. A confirmation message appeared. Emergency contact will be removed from file. I closed my eyes and rested my head against the seat. The decision sat heavy and sharp inside my chest. Not regret, just the weight of a chapter closing. Another spasm of pain gripped my side. I breathed through it, trembling slightly until it eased. I put the phone down and started the engine. The trailhead faded in my rearview mirror as I drove away, the trees receding into a blur of green and gray. By the time I reached the city streets, the first hints of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. Weak and pale, but there all the same. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, the road stretching long and uncertain ahead of me. Sunlight slipped across the windshield in thin, washed-out streaks as I turned onto the street that led back toward my apartment. My hands felt steadier on the wheel than they had an hour ago, though a faint tremor lingered in my wrists. I focused on the road, on the small movements of driving, on anything that kept my mind from circling the message I had sent to the hospital. Removing myself as Sienna's emergency contact felt like pulling free a thread that had been stitched into me since childhood. It left a space behind, raw and oddly quiet. By the time I reached my building, the early afternoon light had softened. I stepped out of the car slowly, one hand on my side, as the familiar ache settled beneath my ribs. It was not as sharp as before, but it reminded me that time was moving even when I tried to stand still. I walked up the stairs, unlocked my door, and let the warm stillness of the apartment surround me. I set my bag and keys on the small table by the entrance and checked the time. I was due back at the clinic the next morning, but right now I had a few hours where no one expected anything from me. The quiet felt strange, like it had shape and weight. I moved to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent. I sipped the water slowly, trying to coax my breath into something steady. When I turned toward the living room, I saw the paperwork for the assistance program still spread across the table. I sat down and opened the folder again, letting my fingers trace the edges of the forms. There was still more to fill out, more signatures, more explanations of financial hardship. I felt a pinch of shame at that phrase, as if needing help somehow made me less capable. But I pushed the thought away and filled out the next section carefully, pausing when the ache flickered through my abdomen. Halfway through the form, I heard a soft knock at the door. I hesitated. For a moment, I wondered if my parents had driven up from Eugene without telling me, something they had done once years ago when Sienna won a scholarship for a summer program. But the thought felt too dramatic. They were not the type to arrive unannounced when it involved me. I opened the door to find Noah standing in the hallway. His camera bag hung from one shoulder, and his hair was still slightly damp from the misty afternoon. He looked at me with a gentle concern that made me feel suddenly unsteady. "I figured I should check in," he said quietly. "I know," I said later, but later felt too far away after the look on your face earlier. I stepped back enough for him to enter. My apartment suddenly felt small, like it was holding its breath along with me. He glanced around, taking in the neat but lived-in space, then set his camera bag on the floor. "You do not have to explain anything," he said softly. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." I sat on the couch and he took the chair across from me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The quiet was not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Finally, I said that I had removed myself from Sienna's emergency record. His eyes lifted to mine. "That sounds like it was hard." "It was harder than I expected," I admitted. "Not because I think they deserve anything from me, but because ending a connection feels heavy, even when it has been hurting you for years." He nodded in that slow way he had, like he was giving the words room to breathe. He asked if I had heard any updates. I shook my head. I turned the phone on silent. I needed a break from all of it. "You needed space to protect yourself," he said. "That is allowed." The kindness in his voice felt steadying. I realized I had not had anyone in my life who spoke to me with that kind of gentle certainty in a long time. A wave of pain tightened across my side, and I winced before I could hide it. Noah leaned forward slightly. "Do you need anything? Water? Heat pack? Someone to call?" I shook my head and breathed slowly until the pain subsided. It passed. It always passes. He watched me carefully. That does not mean you have to deal with it alone. I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of his words settle through me. For months I had been carrying everything quietly, convinced it was easier than asking for help. But hearing him say it out loud made me realize how tired I had become. He nodded toward the folder on the table. Is that the application that helps get you back on the surgery list? Yes, I still need to finish it. He stood and moved to the kitchen. Do you mind if I make coffee? It might help keep you focused. You look like you need something warm. I felt a small, unexpected laugh rise in my chest. Sure, go ahead. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, finding the mugs and the coffee grounds without needing to ask. The simple normality of the moment eased something tight inside me. When he handed me a mug, I held it between both hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. We worked in silence for a while. I filled out forms and he sorted through some of his planning sketches at the table, occasionally asking me about lighting preferences or framing ideas. It felt peaceful, like the world had paused just enough to let me breathe. After a while, he looked up and studied my face carefully. Do you want to take a break? No, I said it softly but firmly. If I stop now, I will lose momentum. He nodded and leaned back, stretching slightly. You know, he said, I meant it earlier. I think you would be really good on the project. You have a way of seeing things people miss. The compliment caught me off guard. My cheeks warmed. Thank you. I have not felt capable lately. Like everything I used to be good at just faded while I was trying to stay upright. He smiled. A small, patient smile. It is still there. You are still there. You are just carrying more than anyone should have to. The room felt warmer then. A softness settled over the table between us. I took a slow sip of coffee and let my shoulders drop. Outside, the gray sky deepened. The apartment lights cast a soft amber glow across the walls. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of calm that did not feel borrowed. Noah checked his watch and stood. I should let you rest. I will call tomorrow. Not to talk about the project unless you want to, but just to check in, make sure you are all right. I walked him to the door. He paused before leaving and looked at me in a way that felt grounding. You are doing the hard thing, he said. Do not forget that. When the door closed, the apartment felt quiet again, but not empty. I returned to the table and finished the last page of the application. When I set the pen down, I felt a small pulse of accomplishment bloom in my chest. My phone vibrated once on the counter. I did not reach for it, not yet. Instead, I placed the completed forms neatly into the folder and let out a breath that felt deeper than anything I had taken all day. For a few moments, I simply sat there, letting the quiet settle around me, letting my thoughts drift like slow-moving water. The sky outside grew darker, the room dimming with it. A faint ache pressed beneath my ribs, steady but bearable, a reminder of what still needed to be faced. I reached for the mug and took one last sip of the warm coffee, feeling its heat settle through me as the evening closed gently around the apartment. The coffee had cooled to a thin, lukewarm film at the bottom of the mug. When I finally leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the finished paperwork settle into the quiet around me, outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long, narrow shadows across the rain-dampened sidewalk. I closed the folder and rested both hands on it, feeling a faint pulse of relief under my palms, relief mixed with the constant throb beneath my ribs. It was not sharp this time, only steady, like my body was reminding me that everything I had been pushing through still waited for its moment. I stood slowly and carried the mug to the sink. The apartment felt dim and warm, the kind of dusk that reminded me of summers long ago, when I would sit at the top of the stairs listening to my parents talk in low voices about Sienna's next audition or scholarship packet. Those memories rose uninvited, and I pushed them aside gently, the same way you move a fragile object out of the path of something heavy. My phone vibrated on the counter again. I did not rush to it. I wiped my hands on a towel first, studying the darkening window above the sink. Then I picked up the phone and saw a list of missed calls from an Italian number, followed by several messages from my mother that had grown increasingly frantic. I opened only the most recent. They are saying she needs to be transferred. They cannot reach Liam. They are asking for you again. I let the message sit there until the screen dimmed. I placed the phone face down and walked into the living room. The soft ache along my side returned with each step. Not enough to double me over, but enough to make me conscious of every inch of movement. I sank onto the couch and let out a slow breath. After a few minutes of stillness, I reached for the phone again. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to know if anything had changed. A new message had arrived from the hospital liaison. It said that Sienna was stable but needed additional evaluation that could not be completed without proper authorization. They wrote that they had contacted the number listed for her travel partner but received no response. They asked if there was anyone else they could reach. I typed a brief reply. There is no one else. Please continue contacting the policyholder. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment as the weight of those words settled into me. Then I pressed it and set the phone in my lap. The apartment grew quieter. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. I leaned back and closed my eyes, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. I had learned that sometimes the body steadies itself if the mind stops trying to force it. A faint knock broke the silence. I startled slightly. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door slowly and found Emery standing there, her expression soft but concerned. She held a small paper bag with a pharmacy label on the side. I figured you might need these tonight, she said. A few pain patches and some herbal tea that helps with inflammation. Nothing strong enough to interfere with your labs. I stepped aside and she walked in. The warm light from the living room softened the sharp lines of her scrubs. She set the bag on the table and looked at me closely. How are you holding up? I hesitated. The truth felt jagged but honest. I feel like everything is pressing in at once, and my side has not stopped aching since noon. She nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Did you get any rest after I left? I shook my head and pressed a palm gently to my abdomen. A little, not enough. She guided me to the couch with a gentle hand on my shoulder. Sit, I will make the tea. While she boiled water, I tried to steady my breathing. She returned with a mug and sat beside me, the warm scent of chamomile filling the quiet room. Do you want to tell me what happened after work? She asked softly. I told her about the messages, about the hospital, about removing myself as the emergency contact. Her face tightened with understanding. That is a painful thing to do, she said. Painful, but sometimes necessary. I nodded, a small motion that pulled slightly at my ribs. She watched me carefully. Your parents put you in an impossible position. That is not your fault. And it is not your responsibility to fix everything they broke. Her words settled into a place deep inside me, a place that had been carrying far too much. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and let my shoulders drop. After a moment, she asked if I had eaten. I told her about the coffee and a small snack earlier. She shook her head and stood up, moving to the kitchen where she assembled a simple bowl of soup she had brought with her. She set it in front of me and waited until I took a few spoonfuls before sitting back again. The pain along my side eased slightly as the warmth spread through my chest. I could feel the fog of exhaustion settling over me, soft but insistent. Emery asked gently, Have you decided what you want to do about the messages? I held the mug in both hands. I do not know. I want to be the kind of person who can help her, but I also want to survive my own life. And right now, it feels like those two things cannot exist in the same place. She nodded, her eyes filled with something steady and compassionate. You do not have to decide tonight. Rest first. Think when your mind is clearer. I finished the soup slowly. When I set the bowl down, she gathered her bag and paused at the door. I am on call tonight, she said. If your pain worsens, even a little, do not hesitate. Call me, I mean it. I thanked her, and she gave me a small warm smile before leaving. After she was gone, the apartment felt still, but not empty the way it sometimes did. More like it was holding a gentle quiet that let my thoughts settle without spiraling. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The rain had cleared, but the pavement still glistened faintly under the streetlights. A couple walked past holding hands, talking softly. A car turned the corner and disappeared into the next block. I returned to the couch, settling carefully onto the cushions. I pulled the blanket over my legs and rested my hand lightly against my side. The throbbing had eased, slow and steady now, like the distant echo of something that would not be silenced completely until the surgery happened. I reached for the phone again, not to read anything but to turn the volume back on in case the clinic called about my application or if my condition worsened during the night. As soon as the screen lit, another message arrived. This one was from my mother. It was longer than the others. Her words spilled across the screen in frantic lines, describing how the hospital was running out of options, how Liam had disappeared entirely, how she did not know what to do. She ended the message with a sentence that pressed hard against the back of my chest. Please, Marta, you are all we have left. I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the familiar pull of guilt and obligation clawing at old wounds. Then I switched the phone to silent again and placed it gently on the table. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, the kind that sank into bone and thought. I curled up on the couch, letting the soft glow of the lamp and the faint hum of the city outside blur into a quiet, steady backdrop. As my eyes drifted shut, the ache in my side pulsed once more, not sharp, but unmistakable, a reminder that my own clock was still ticking. I pressed my palms softly to my ribs and let sleep gather itself slowly around me, the quiet deepening into something dark and still. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was still dim, lit only by the soft amber glow of the lamp I had forgotten to turn off. My body felt heavy, as if the weight of the night had settled deep into my bones. For a long moment I stayed curled under the blanket, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment and the faint drizzle tapping against the window. Then the dull ache along my ribs pushed me upright, slow and careful. I sat on the edge of the couch and rubbed my side with the heel of my hand, waiting for the tightness to ease. My phone sat where I had left it on the table. I stared at it without touching it, letting the silence stretch a little longer. Eventually, I picked it up and turned the volume back on. More messages appeared, but none from the clinic. The hospital in Salerno had sent a brief update saying they were arranging a temporary transfer while they waited for clear instructions from the travel insurance provider. My mother had sent another plea in the early hours, her words scattered and desperate. I set the phone down and breathed through another small wave of pain. Today was the day I needed to deliver the completed forms for the assistance program. That thought steadied me. It gave my morning shape. I showered slowly, letting the warm water loosen the stiffness in my back, then dressed and packed the folder into my bag. The sky outside was pale and washed with mist. I walked down the stairs carefully, one hand on the rail, and drove to the clinic through quiet streets glistening from the rain. Inside, the familiar rush of movement greeted me. Nurses in soft-soled shoes, phones ringing, the scent of disinfectant mixed with coffee. Emery spotted me near the front desk and walked over with a look that told me she had been thinking about me since she left my apartment. "You made it," she said gently. "How is the pain?" "Manageable," I said, though I was not sure it was entirely true. She touched my arm lightly. "Let's get these forms where they need to go." We walked to Dr. Hale's office together. He greeted me with a warm, steady expression and took the folder from my hands, flipping through the pages with practiced focus. "Everything looks correct," he said. "I will submit this myself and call the review board again. You should hear something within a few days, maybe sooner." A quiet exhale left my body, part relief, part exhaustion. "Thank you. I know this is a lot." He shook his head. "This is exactly what we're here for. Your health comes first. Do not forget that." I nodded and stepped out into the hallway. Emery lingered by my side, watching me with the same soft patience she used with nervous patients. She asked if I felt up to a short shift or if I needed rest. I told her I wanted to work for a few hours. Keeping busy helped. She studied my face and then agreed with a small nod. The morning passed in a gentle rhythm: room prep, vital checks, updating charts. Each task gave me something firm to hold in place of the scattered thoughts that tried to pull me backward. Around mid-morning, I stepped into the staff lounge for water and found Noah leaning against the counter with his camera bag beside him. His presence brought a softness to the room. He smiled when he saw me. "I was hoping I would catch you. How are you doing today?" I gave a small shrug, a little tired, a little sore, but all right. He studied me for a moment, as if checking the truth behind my words. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I drafted a few concepts for the wellness project. Only if you want to look at them. No pressure." I took the paper and felt something warm unfurl inside me. It had been so long since anyone invited me into something creative without expecting me to carry the entire weight of it. I told him I would take a look later, and he said that was perfect. Before he left, he asked if I needed anything. I said no, but the offer eased something tight in my chest. Later in the afternoon, while I stocked an exam cabinet, my phone vibrated. I checked the screen expecting another message from Italy, but this time it was a call from the assistance program office. My heart jumped. I stepped into an empty hallway and answered softly. A calm voice explained that my application had been received and marked as urgent. They told me the review had been completed faster than expected, and I had been approved for partial coverage. They could schedule surgery as soon as the following week, depending on availability. I pressed my free hand against my chest, as relief flooded through me so quickly I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." When the call ended, I stood for several seconds, letting the news settle into my bones. Surgery, a real date, a chance to end the pain that had followed me for months. It felt unreal. Emery found me still standing in the hallway. When she saw my expression, she broke into a rare, wide smile. "They approved it, didn't they?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She wrapped her arms around me in a warm, firm hug, the kind that makes you realize how much you needed one. I felt my throat tighten with gratitude. By the time my shift ended, the light outside had softened into late afternoon gold. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting cool air wash through the car. For the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest sense of hope stretching gently through the ache in my body. When I reached my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window. I watched people walk dogs, joggers pass by, a neighbor carrying groceries up the stairs. Normal life, ordinary life. A life I wanted to rejoin fully. My phone lit up again. This time I opened the message. It was from my father. He wrote that the hospital had managed to place Sienna in a temporary care unit, but they still needed financial authorization from the travel provider. He wrote that Liam was gone and that they did not know what would happen next. I read the message twice, then I set the phone aside. I whispered softly to the quiet room, "I hope she gets the care she needs, but I cannot carry what is not mine anymore." The ache in my ribs pulsed with a dull reminder. I pressed my hand gently against it and let my breath slow. As the sky dimmed into evening, I opened the folded paper Noah had given me. Clean lines, soft colors, a gentle concept built around healing and light. I traced the sketches with my fingertips and felt something loosen inside me. A small doorway opening, a life waiting just beyond the one I had been forced to live. I stood and walked to the kitchen, turning on a lamp as the shadows settled in. My apartment felt warm, steady, and mine in a way it had not before. I sat at the table with a notebook and let myself imagine the next chapter: surgery, recovery, work that made me feel alive. People who saw me as more than a backup plan. Before bed, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. The city hummed softly in the distance. I closed my eyes and felt the first real moment of peace in months. To everyone listening to my story, if you have ever carried more than your share, if you have ever been expected to fix what you did not break, I hope you choose yourself the way I finally did. Leave a thought or a story of your own if you feel like it. You never know who you might help by sharing it.